Welcome back to Against the Cage. My name is Jake Aryeh, your host. I'm here with my co-hosts Scott Fontana and Erich Richter. Guys, how we doing?
Doing good.
Alrighty.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Yes. Alrighty. So the news of this week and the big news of today, Justin Gaethje, his opponent Dan Hooker, pulled out of the fight due to injury earlier this week. Throughout the week, there was a lot of speculation on who his new opponent might be. Last night, we find out from Dana White it is Rafael Fiziev in a rematch. Erich, what do you think of this fight?
Well, they fought before, right? So I was pretty jazzed about the fight. I'm pretty excited, honestly. I think Fiziev versus Gaethje is a really fun fight. We've actually seen it before. Yeah, I'll just give you my a little initial thoughts. I rewatched the first fight. Fiziev was way faster. In the first fight, especially through the first round and a half. I think that the main questions that you're going to be asking now about Gaethje is, we were asking it the first time that these guys fought. Fiziev was a minus 300 favorite in that fight, and Gaethje ended up winning by majority decision. So now the question that we're going to be asking is, does Gaethje still have it? He's coming off of one of the more brutal knockouts that we've ever seen when he got knocked out by Max Holloway. So now the same questions are going to be asked. Does Gaethje still have it? He's the most violent man in the sport. Eventually, damage has to come into play here for the UFC veteran. So now we look at it, and Fiziev's, a light favorite, minus 140. He's taking this on short notice. Should be faster. We're not sure what kind of shape that he's in, but he was the way faster fighter in the first fight, and we're going to have to see what he does here in the second fight. Scott, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, honestly, great points, Eric. You're bringing up a whole lot of the keys to this fight. I like that. Just in general, this fight, I'm happy with it. Like I think realistically, what are you going to do on short notice? You've got to come up with something that's got to happen next week. There's only a few guys that are really in the mix to fight a Justin Gaethje, and I think Rafael Fiziev, rematch being what it is, it's still a solid decision here. Could it have been something more out of left field if they had more time to play with? Yeah, maybe you can even get somebody like maybe you convince Ilya Topuria not to take a title fight when he comes up. But that was not realistic. As far as options that were on the table, I think the UFC did a good job here, and I think we should be happy.
Would you guys say that this new fight is more interesting than the original? How do you kind of weigh those two? I'll kick it back to Erich.
Well, it's more interesting. I mean, just straight up from a perspective of Gaethje's already beaten him, right? And then Fiziev comes in here and he is favored to win again. It is short notice, but in the striking aspect of it, we saw Gaethje just chop his legs down. The first round, Fiziev dominated the first round, won it on every scorecard, and then even had a 10-8 on one scorecard. So, are we going to see more of the first round? In the second round of that fight, Gaethje poked Fiziev in the eye, and I know we're going to talk more about fouls and penalties, but I think that that's worth noting that Gaethje poked Fiziev in the eye and then kind of took over the second round around the 3 minute mark. I think that that's super relevant here in this fight. So yeah, I mean, from an interest level perspective, I'd say it's interesting no matter what. It's going to be it's a big fight. Anything that Gaethje does is going to be fun. He's the king of violence. And you look at Fiziev's face at the end of the fight. I mean, his eyes were really screwed up. Partly one eye, partly from an eye poke that two fingers went in too deep, and then the other one he just beat up. So I think Fiziev's gonna have to learn about the kicking. His body kicks were nasty. I'm interested to see if he goes back to that in this one, or if that opened him up to leg kicks. But from an interest level perspective, I mean, it doesn't get much better. I mean, maybe you could have looked for Dustin Poirier, but it doesn't sound like he was even offered the fight. I think Fiziev versus Gaethje is a great fight. It's as good as it was going to get on a short notice replacement.
What I think is kind of the issue here is it more interesting than the original Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker? I say no. I really think that a fresh look at two guys whose names are always in the fight of the year mix, not just fight of the night, fight of the year. I think we lose that. It definitely, we all suffer, but only a little bit because, again, just like Erich said, anything Justin Gaethje touches is going to be violent and it's going to be fun and entertaining. Rafael Fiziev very similar too, so it's a step down, but like almost like a half step.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of your points, and it's good for Gaethje too, because some of the other opponents that might be thrown in the mix, like an Arman Sarukian, it's a definitely very different preparation for a fight. Fiziev is Not exactly the same, of course, Dan Hooker, but more the same. Some, we can expect a war from these two guys. A lot of news coming out from Dana White over Instagram Live Wednesday nights in the past couple weeks. It seems like that's how we're getting our news these days. Erica, I understand you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I'll be honest. I agree that the UFC has done a lot of things that are different than everybody else, and that other companies have jumped into. Like one big one that the UFC has done in the past is they had cameras on the commentators who would react to different things that would happen. So like a knockout, you get the Joe Rogan, Dana Cormier clip, like oh my god, and then the NBA jumped in on doing stuff like that as well. That's all fine. This way, the way that they're currently announcing news is different than anything else. If you want to compare it to the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, that's who they compare themselves to. But even if you want to compare themselves to, how about like a WWE? The UFC is doing this completely different. I look at it and I honestly, it's not that much fun to me. Like, imagine you got announced a trade and there's just the NBA was the only one announcing trades. That's not fun for me. I actually think it's worse for the sport. I think it's more fun for Dana, right? So if Dana just wants to do the TikTok thing where it's like an episode of Michael Scott and when he's doing the Michael Scott Paper Company episodes in the Office, where Charles Miner looks at him and he goes, this isn't about your vanity, right? This is a company. I feel like this is a promotion. I feel like we should be looking at it as what's best for the company, not what's most fun for the president. I think it's most fun for him to, get the Instagram juice and do it on social media and be an influencer and TikTok and, need a drama and all that stuff. It's all that stuff is all fun for him that he can do on the side if he wants to. But for me, what's best for the sport, there's other ways to do this. There's no promo package, there's no video. If you know that you're announcing this and no one else is getting this information, why don't you have a promo video? Why is it just Dana talking on Instagram Live? Makes no sense to me. You don't have to leak it to reporter like NBA does, like with agents and stuff, but at least have something creative about it, not just Dana White going on Instagram and being like, oh, follow me on Instagram at the end of it. And it's all this weird stuff. It's very confusing to me. I think it's bad for the sport. I think it's bad for engagement. Overall, I think that the UFC needs to revamp the way that they're giving out information now. If they don't want to work with Brett Okamoto anymore and they don't want to work with Ariel Helwani, that's fine. But figure out a different way to do this, because the Instagram Live thing, it makes me feel like I'm following a TikTok influencer, and I don't think that that's what the sport is going for.
Honestly, I disagree a little bit here. I think you bring up a couple of interesting points. Like, I would love it if there was more of a hype package, like you're saying, like a video to accompany it. Would, I think, be a lot more interesting than the same old Dana White coming at you shouting all these new interesting matchups at you. Hey, what's up, everybody? But I don't have a problem with that. I think when they struck the match last week to announce all of those Miami fights, the UFC 314. I think that was fantastic. It was a gigantic drop of really awesome stuff. Could it have been better with a bit of a video package? Sure. But I don't have a distinct problem with the way that was handled. And frankly, what else are they going to do to announce the Dan Hooker is out of the fight? We already knew he was out, but announce the new opponent being Rafael Fiziev for Justin Gaethje. How else are they going to do that other than just leak it to a reporter? I don't have a distinct issue with it. It's not like they have if they had like a weekly UFC program that was on maybe every Wednesday night or something like that people could count on. Maybe it was on ESPN Plus or something like that. Then sure, that makes sense. But other than that, I think this is okay. I know no big issue with it.
Scott, I got news for you. They do have a weekly program on. It's every Saturday. You could just do a video promo. And just like how they were trying to do it with Brock Lesnar at UFC 199 at the time. They tried to do it with Brock Lesnar when he was fighting Mark Hunt. Obviously, Ariel Helwani broke that story, and we know that. But every week they could put it out in a video package that could be really fun. But this just doesn't seem fun. It feels like influencer type stuff, and it's just weird.
What are they going to do with the fact that they've got to announce the new opponent for Justin Gaethje, though? They're not going to wait till Saturday.
Yeah, Gaethje not as much.
There's no way to keep that.
Yeah, Gaethje not as much. More so about the Jack Della Maddalena versus Leon Edwards fight was kind of just like thrown in there in an Instagram Live. That was my main issue is with that news dump, honestly. This is a fight coming out. It's a little bit different. But yeah, I hear you.
I was going to say a UFC news breaking show on Wednesday nights would be very good for our program. Thursdays, 5 p.m.
Sure, it'd be for us, yeah.
Anyways, so with that out of the way, kind of wrapping up this fight. Now that we know what the fight is, how do you guys see it playing out for these two fighters? What comes next for them? Or do you think the original fight should be booked again if Justin Gaethje should win?
I personally I would love it if they could redo this fight, almost even if Gaethje loses too. I think it's much better if he wins. You'd have to kind of see how things go off of that fight if it doesn't go Justin Gaethje's way. But I think this is a fight that's actually a little bit important for the division. I think I really want to see what Dan Hooker can do against this level. Obviously, it would be challenging for him to win this fight and then get a title shot, not only because of the glut up at the top, but the fact that he lost a couple years ago to Islam Makhachev was not a terribly convincing side from him. So I'm okay with them really going back to this. I really hope we get it. It's going to be fun for everybody. Who loses if that fight goes on?
Yeah, I'll go ditto there. I was really excited for Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje. I wanted to see that fight, and I will want to see that fight when this fight ends. We've already seen Fiziev Gaethje. It will probably be a really, really close fight, and it'll be super interesting to watch. But I want to see Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje. I think that Dan Hooker's size really poses an issue for Gaethje, and I think that Dan Hooker's size, also will be an issue for him because he's got long legs, and those long legs can get chopped down. So I really want to see that fight. I hope that they rebook it, maybe International Fight Week.
Alrighty, so wrapping up this Justin Gaethje, Fiziev, Dan Hooker saga, it's actually a little bit of interesting information. I understand, Scott, you spoke to Dan Hooker earlier this week. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I had a scheduled interview with him on Monday evening Eastern time. So we're talking about like Tuesday morning out where his way is. I believe he was in New Zealand, his native New Zealand at this point. So when I'm talking to him, we have a nice conversation. He's talking about, Ducks Quack and, Dan Hooker fights MFers and that all that stuff. Good conversation. No indication that he was hurt. Apparently, he had gotten hurt. I understand why he's not going to volunteer that information. But what was interesting was when I went back and watched our conversation afterward, you could see that he very clearly puts his hands together at one point like this, and one hand is a whole lot more swollen than the other. So the writing was there. I didn't quite pick up on it. I don't know who really would. That was the only time I saw his hand. There was almost like a clear effort not to show this hand. He was looking down at it a little few times. But from all indications, he did this knowing that he was trying to fight. He figured he was going to fight through whatever the heck it was. I have no doubt that he was like, yeah, I'll fight with a broken hand. That's fine. Because I don't think he was just anxious to do media. So the fact that he did it, I think probably that he broke his hand, I think was probably surprising, even to him, that he wouldn't be able to fight with it.
Yeah, no, from a third party looking at that image, you could definitely say that that hand is very likely broken. So with that being the big news of the week, there's actually some news that happened over this past weekend at UFC Seattle that is kind of carried into this week. The main event, of course, Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. Henry takes a nasty eye poke. Scott, could you run us through that situation before we start tearing it apart?
Yeah, so, first off, Song Yadong's having a pretty solid fight. Henry's in the mix, but he's not winning this fight, as we find out very shortly thereafter on the cards. But he takes a nasty eye poke from, the outstretched fingers of Song Yadong, ends up using the full 5 minutes that he's allotted, gets back into the fight. No point is taken. Henry does not engage, really. The final minute plus, he's not throwing any strikes, he's not attempting, as we hear the commentators catching and pointing out to us as the viewers. We get to the between the rounds, and he tells his corner right away that he can't see. He still can't see. Jason Herzog, our referee, catches wind of this, ends up getting the fight to the point where he can stop it, and it goes to the scorecards because we have 3 completed rounds. The scorecards go the other way, and Henry loses that fight. No point was taken. I stress that because it very much would have impacted the decision here. 2 29-28s for Song. If 1 point is taken instead of a Song win, it is a majority draw. And that cost Henry Cejudo a loss. And it obviously creates kind of this situation where we see one of the many holes in the mixed martial arts rule set.
I think that this is a big problem in the sport. I think that we need to figure out a way, and I understand because the referee says it to every opponent, everyone that commits a foul is like, don't put me in a position where I have to enforce the rules. shouldn't really be like that, right? Like it should be like if you make a mistake, you're in trouble and you have to pay the price for that. So for me, I look at it like Henry Cejudo was poked in the eye. He took his full 5 minutes, still couldn't see. He showed the picture afterwards, super bloodshot eye. So, I think that this is, broadly, this is a problem in the UFC. Groin strikes are a problem, not quite as much. For me, my main two issues are eye pokes and fence grabs. For me, if you're grabbing the fence and you're stop the takedown, you should lose the position or lose a point or both. And then the same thing for eye pokes. If you poke somebody in the eye and it changes the entire fight, basically, if you can't see out of his eye, like think about remember when Daniel Cormier fought Stipe Miocic, his eye was really messed up. He could not, it ruined the fight. I mean, literally ruined the fight. In some cases, you should lose the fight if the eye poke is bad enough. In that case of Daniel Cormier, you should lose the fight because of it. So for me, I'm looking at it like Cejudo got poked in the eye. That stinks. And I'm not sure that Song Yadong should have lost, but I think a DQ or a no contest, I would have been fine with either. Honestly, I thought it was crazy.
Well, the problem is that the rules are in such a way that as long as Henry says he's going to continue, once that fight restarts, Jason cannot even take a point. The rules don't allow for that. If a point is to be taken, it needs to be taken at that particular moment. Should it have been taken in that moment? Probably. I think almost definitely. I'm with you, Eric. I want to see points taken on not just eye pokes, but if you're egregiously putting your hand out there, that is against the rules because it's meant to avoid these eye pokes. And they're worse than the fence grabs because a fence grab, yes, it's cheating. It's going to keep you from getting your position. You poke someone in the eye, they might not fight the same way again or ever again. We need to avoid that because it is very much a career changing foul for some people. We don't want that. It's got to be penalized. Jim Miller, of course, the most experienced UFC veteran there is, most fights in the UFC. He'd shared with Jake and I actually when we were at his house last year writing about him and covering him. He'd said the same thing and he just shared this week. You start taking money from people when they poke in the eye, it's gone. And I think he's probably onto something. So I would like to see a lot more of that.
So just to clarify, it seems, Scott, it seems from you, I can definitely tell this, but do you guys think that anytime someone gets fouled, as in poked in the eye, or a groin strike happens or a fence grab happens, automatic point?
I think definitely with eye pokes. I think if you poke in the eye and it can be identified as a definitive eye poke, finger goes in, pokes in the eye. Let's take a point here because there is no way to bounce back and say, oh, he's fine. You have to take the point. I absolutely think that. I also would love to see, and this is not in the rules right now, you can't do it. But let's face it, the eye poke ended this fight. Whether the fight continued or not, the eye poke ended this fight. Jason Herzog does not have the ability to go back retroactively and say, okay, this is either a disqualification or no contest because of the eye poke. If he has to stop that fight at that point, once the fight has restarted, he is obligated to call it a TKO loss for Henry Cejudo. And that's just not right. That doesn't get the crux of what we're trying to get here is the right result. We don't get there. The rules don't allow it. We have to find a way to make that happen. So that's up to the rules committee with the Association of Boxing Commissions. They're going to have to get together, put their heads together, and figure out what the right solution is for that.
A point for eye pokes, definitely lose position more for fence grabs. This is obvious low hanging fruit. Seems like they're under the direction of a commission or a promotion that's telling the referees to not get involved in any capacity. It helps cheaters, right? Like, I don't know, like Dustin Poirier has been cheated a couple times in fights. A couple that come to mind is when he fought Charles Oliveira and Oliveira grabbed the glove and then was able to get a position, a grappling position that Poirier didn't want to be in. Another one was Michael Chandler was like hitting the back of his head and was gouging out his eyes during grappling exchanges. I think that there needs to be something done. I don't know exactly what the right answer is. Like, I'm not trying to say that all of those should have ended in disqualification or anything like that. But, we're in a spot here where someone's going to lose an eye and then the commissions are going to have a big problem with this. The commissions will have a huge problem if somebody loses an eye. And I think everyone's been talking about this and no one's going to do anything until something really bad happens. So kind of just is what it is. a point for eyes, a point for or a lost position for a fence grab. I'm fine with those options, but it'll probably never happen.
I'm gonna push back just a little bit on kind of where this whole push is coming from for they're not taking points. I think it's kind of a groupthink thing among officials, just from having talked to so many officials over the years, very like pretty much a ton of the officials that you tend to see every week on UFC shows. I've spoken to many of them in private and just in conversation, you get the sense that what it is they don't want to have to inject themselves into the fight, alluding to something you brought up before, Eric. They don't want to have to affect the fight. There's only 3 rounds. You take a point, it drastically changes it because we just don't have a whole lot of frames in which we can do things with. It's one of those things where you don't want to insert yourself into the fight, but maybe, just maybe, the perspective is if the foul is committed, they are injecting you into the fight. It is your obligation to take the point. That's what I would like to see more officials do, especially again when it comes to eye pokes in particular.
Yeah, I understand that. This has obviously been a huge topic of conversation throughout this week, and some of the conversations that I've been hearing are much like the one that we're having right now, automatic point being taken away. The first thing that came to mind when I started hearing this kind of thing is it might influence fighters to not that the sport could ever become something like soccer, where you get tapped and, you fall on the ground, but where they might use it in a way to get points taken away. However, as I'm aware, while the time is being allotted to the fighter who was fouled, the referee has an opportunity to take a look at the foul. Could you guys explain that a little bit more to fans like myself who might not know the rules as well and what happens in those situations?
Yeah, so essentially, if there is a screen around or if there is a replay official, they can communicate that, hey, there is a foul here. We saw it. It's identified. Sometimes they'll do that, and if there's a case of, let's say, a low kick, that could it have been more the abdomen than the groin area, they can identify that. And there's certainly precedent, depending on which official you get, where the fight either could be just restarted. They say, no, you get no more time. You got to keep going. Or it can be waved off as a TKO because you're really not supposed to be able to recover from a legal strike if that foul was in fact not a foul, right? So yes, there are mechanisms in place, but that doesn't really apply here. I mean, we knew there was a foul, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the replay showed it all. 2 fingers, not one. Question for you guys. As far as Henry and Song goes, Dana White did not seem too keen on the idea of a Henry Song Yadong rematch. Eric, I'll start with you. What do you think about that fight, yay or nay?
Yeah, after watching the fight, even when I was watching it, it was tough for Cejudo to really close the distance. He was going with the kicks. The kicks weren't doing much. He wasn't really able to close the distance for grappling exchanges. So by the 3rd round, he basically had decided he was willing to eat shots in order to close the distance and land some. He actually did a pretty good job. His chin held up better than I think many expected, and it's impressive that he's still at that level and he's able to get close the distance against a guy who looked way bigger than him in there and a guy who's a way better striker than he is. And he was closing the distance, and he was really just closing the distance with that front jab with his left hand. He was able to close the distance and get there. I'm not even remotely interested in the fight. I think that we saw what we saw, and I think that honestly, I think Cejudo kind of got bailed out. Eventually, Yadong was going to land on a right hook or a left cross or something deadly that was going to take him out. So actually, I think Cejudo kind of got lucky there. Not lucky, but I think that it was a good. I want to say that it was a good thing that he got poked in the eye because it's not, but it wasn't gonna win the fight. I don't think anyone thinks that he was gonna win the fight. So for me, I'm not interested in the fight. I would rather see Cejudo fight like Aldo. I know Aldo has a fight, and we're gonna talk about that, but yeah, I think I'd rather do Cejudo Aldo. That's just me.
We'll just put me down as a nay. I'm a whole 100% nay.
Alrighty, sounds good to me. And then as far as Henry Cejudo, where do you think this leaves him career-wise? Do you see any potential matchups that interest you? Scott, given that you're resounding nay, what would you like to see?
I don't hate his call out of Peter Yan if he doesn't get the rematch, but he's not going to get the rematch. So I'm okay with that. But realistically, I just don't. I don't know how much longer Henry Cejudo needs to keep going. He has accomplished probably everything he's going to at this point. I don't think he's got another championship run in him. If he does, he's more than welcome to do it. He's accomplished so much in his life, in wrestling, in mixed martial arts. He's got the grace period, as far as I'm concerned, to do as he pleases. But yeah, I like Peter Yan, but also if he feels like he's done, head on off now. I think everything is there.
Yeah, word, as the kids would say. I'd like to see Peter Yan. I'd like to see Henry Cejudo do anything. He's a really entertaining athlete, but like you said, he's done everything he needs to do. He's got a podcast that's really successful. He's a good coach. He's probably the best coach in the sport. So yeah, for me, I'm good. He can move on.
Alrighty, so that's the big news of the week out of the way, but we got some other agenda items, some little small bits of news. Scott, could you enlighten us as to what else is going on in the MMA world?
Yeah, some brief fight announcements. We've got a headliner for UFC Kansas City on April 26th, Jamal Hill against Khalil Roundtree. One main addition to UFC 314 in April. That is Bryce Mitchell going against John Silva, excuse me, announced by Dana White. We have a couple additions to UFC 315 in May in Montreal. That is Jose Aldo, as Eric mentioned before, against Ayman Zahabi, announced by the UFC, as well as Jessica Andrade against Jasmine Jasudavicius in a popular Canada fight there. We have the announcements for the officials for next week's Alex Pereira against Magomed Ankalaev. The referee for that one's going to be Mark Goddard. Judges, Mike Bell, Derek Cleary, and Sal D'Amato. Kind of a local UFC here. We've got Dennis Bazookia from Staten Island, suspended 9 months by the Nevada State Athletic Commission for getting into a fan altercation at UFC 310. He can reduce that to 6 months with community service. And then PFL news a little bit here this week. They announced the lightweight and middleweight tournament fields as well. That's the quick hits for you guys.
Alrighty, thank you, Scott. Now, looking forward to this weekend, we were supposed to be getting Brandon Royval taking on Manel Kape. That fell through. It's now Manel Kape versus Asu Almabayev. That's going to be taking place at the UFC Apex at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Maine. Eric, I understand you are very interested in this main event.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched Almabayev's fights against Jose Johnson, and I actually came away pretty impressed with all of Almabayev's fights. I actually think that his striking defense is quite good. And I have more of that when I talk about bets, but I think that Almabayev's striking defense is quite good, and obviously we know Manel Kape is not the highest volume striker, but he's probably the best athlete at flyweight. So I'm definitely interested in this fight. And Almabayev was on the card already, so it's not like he's going to be totally out of shape in there. You should be ready to fight.
Hey, give me more flyweights. I like flyweight main events here. This is going to be a fun one. I actually like another flyweight fight on this card as well earlier on. Charles Energy Johnson going against Ramazan Temirov. That's a great fight too. That's much earlier in the prelims here. So, like I said, you can't go wrong with the flyweight guys. They're always fun.
Great call out there. That one's going to be super interesting. It's probably my most excited one to watch on the prelim card. But how about Sam Patterson? He takes on Danny Barlow here. It's a submission grappler versus a striker. This one's not going to decision. I mean, it'd be surprising. It's minus 500 to not go to decision. Sam Patterson's got 3 submission victories in his 4 fights in the UFC. Danny Barlow's a crazy striker. Fireworks. That's all we want here is fireworks. This is going to be high-level technical stuff. I think that both fighters are really skilled. I don't see this. I don't know why this one's on the early prelims, but I love this fight, and yeah, I can't wait to see what you say about this card, Scott.
That's a good transition, Scott. If you have not watched last week's episode, go ahead and do it. Shameless plug. Scott's got a system for rating cards. What is the rating for this weekend's card?
So this card, this is going to be a little bit of a deceiving number here because out of a 100 scale, this is rated a 6. So it's near the very bottom. But the reason why it is because of our co-main event kind of weighing this down. Cody Brundage against Julian Marquez. Really not a very important fight by any means. Could it be fun? Sure. But there are a lot more interesting fights down card. So realistically, I think this is a situation where sometimes my rating scale weighs a little too heavily on certain things. It's still a fun card. Watch those prelims. I like the main event, like I said. I think there's a lot to watch here, but frankly, what are we doing with this co-main? It is a little silly.
Alrighty, so with those fights under our belt, a lot of things that you could be betting on. Eric, I'll toss it to you for your bets. 3 bets, 3 minutes. Clock is ticking.
3 bets, 3 minutes. Last week we did it in 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Let's do it again. We're going back to the warehouse. We're going back to the Apex, and we're going to start off with the main event: Manel Kape versus Almabayev. For me, I think that Kape's a way better athlete. I think that Kape's a better striker, and I think that Kape has really good takedown defense. 77% takedown defense, eighth best in flyweight history. Almabayev, he's going to need to really push the pace here if he thinks he's going to win. Kape, his cardio is a little suspect. He definitely got tired against Muhammad Mokaev there in that third round of a not very active fight. So, for me, I think that this one's going the distance. I'm going to goes the distance at -130. I love flyweight fights to go the distance. So for me, I don't really see too much grappling being successfully done by Almabayev. I think that he could maybe just trust his cardio, because that's what his coach should tell him to do. Trust the cardio and just go. But that's for me. And the co-main event, right? The next fight that we talk about, the co-main event that Scott just said, it's not a very good co-main event. It's because it's not a very good co-main event. Julian Marquez fights Cody Brundage. Neither fighter is ever really going to sniff a title, or at one point Marquez was ranked, but he's been smashed his last two fights, two losses, two bad losses. He comes in here as a favorite, which I'm kind of surprised about. I think that the roadmap for him would be like maybe a submission off of a double leg takedown by Brundage. But for me, I don't even see that. I just thought Brundage looked really good against Bo Nickel, and Bo Nickel being an elite prospect and Brundage being a little bit undersized in that fight. For me, I'm going to go Brundage here, +130 underdog. He's got better technique, better power, and honestly, just a better chin. I understand the double leg front headlock, front guillotine submission threat by Marquez. Very good submission grappler, but he kind of gets tired at the end of fights. His chin's going, and he'll definitely settle for bottom position. And I'd prefer to bet on the more aggressive grappler here than I'd sit here and bet on Marquez at favorite spot. I just think that's nuts. And how about like a really, really long shot one? We've talked about that. We've talked about me doing that in the past. Ricardo Ramos versus Chepe Mariscal. Ricardo Ramos, not that bad of a fighter. I mean, he's lost 2 of his last 3, but those were by like insta taps in the first round. He made a bunch of mistakes as a grappler. He gets submitted quick by Bill Algeo. For me, I think that Ricardo Ramos is a little bit underrated here. I think that Mariscal is a better athlete for sure. But this fight opened at -180. It's now ballooned for Mariscal. And now Mariscal's -500. I don't know. Like, is Ramos injured? I don't know. But that's a huge move. Usually the books are right when they put an initial line and then it gets bet up. I did a study about this from the Action Network. You can look at my archive there. But the betting odds are usually right when they put something in like close and then it ends up being not close by the closing line. So for me, Ramos is a +380 underdog on Bet Rivers. He's gonna need to do something early in the first round. He's gonna need to do something early to gain some respect. But we've seen Ramos do well before. When he fought Ayman Zahabi, he beat him, and he's a ranked fighter in the division. So, for me, like, he's good strength of schedule and he's pretty well rounded. For me, I'll take a shot on the long shot underdog +380 Ricardo Ramos.
Eric, thanks for that. We're going to get to the home stretch here. And at this point, I'm going to kick it over to our guy, Jake, who is the subject of our MMA homework kind of assignment from last episode. We gave him the opportunity to finally watch Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard #2, one of the greatest fights, especially championship fights in UFC history. Tell us what you thought, Jake.
So honestly, it's like watching a movie that you know the ending to, but you're like, how the heck did they get there? I don't want to spoil too much, but if knowing that this fight is one of the most legendary fights of all time, get to the end of the first round and you'll be hooked, because that's actually all I'm going to say. It's fantastic. That first round sets up the rest of the fight as a must-watch, and it's got tremendous rewatch value, or even just value knowing what the result is and still watching through it. Sometimes people think that knowing the result of a fight makes it not fun to watch. This one actually kind of adds to it. So, yeah, I loved it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we're going to give you a second assignment for next week, which also doubles as our This Week in MMA, because 18 years ago now was Pride 33, February 24, 2007. So many great fights from that one, but in particular, I'm assigning you Nick Diaz against Takanori Gomi. Just a wild fight for you to watch. It's fun. Enjoy it.
Alrighty, go watch that fight, everyone. That you got your homework for the week. Alrighty, so we got the this week in MMA. We got the fight recommendation, guys. I think we are about ready to go. Mr. Scott Fontana will unfortunately be out for a few weeks because he has to get a procedure done. So Eric and I are wishing you a very speedy recovery, and we know we will see you soon. He and I will be holding down the fort until next week. So
You'll see me soon, guys.
yes, alrighty. See you guys next week, or see you, Eric, next week.